The film that I watched, I've probably seen the most in my life, is E.T. When I was a kid and saw that movie for the first time, I saw actually a screening of it with my father, and so I knew nothing about it. I just knew that it was a new Steven Spielberg movie. I was pretty young, but I already knew I liked Steven Spielberg because I wasn't allowed to see Jaws, but I'd heard about Jaws, and so, I knew the poster, but I'd seen Close Encounters, and I was very excited about it, but I had no idea what it was, and I cried so hard. I got a sty in my eye because I was rubbing my eyes so much. And I even remember the T-shirt I had because at a certain point I didn't know what I actually almost put my T-shirt over my face because it was a Snoopy T-shirt because I had to somehow dry my face. But it was such a cathartic experience. I think to have permission to be so emotional in a movie at that age was, I guess I must have been around 10 or 11 when it came out, or 12. And I just kept going back to it over and over and over again. And I thought about E.T. in some ways for Marriage Story, because it is also a movie in some ways about divorce and post-divorce. In the case of E.T., the divorces happened beforehand. And this was before VHS too, so I would go back to the theater every time to see it. If I thought about where I find inspiration in my work, I would probably not feel very inspired most of the time. I mean, when it works best, I'll be walking down the street and it could be something more literal, like I'll hear something someone says and it's just the way they say it, or it's what they say, or the phrasing of what they say that gives me another idea, that gives me an idea for character, gives me an idea for story. But sometimes that just happens anyway, just if I let my mind wander, which of course becomes increasingly more difficult in the world of phones. But I think just trying to find space to daydream and that's when stories come, when ideas come. It can happen in all ways where how a story unfolds. Sometimes I'll have a character idea and I'm looking for a story to put the character. Movie I made, Greenberg, that Ben Stiller played, I had this sort of notion of the character but not the story. Other times I've had more an idea of story or of place or a visual, and that helps me discover the character. But every movie's different that way. And these are all, I have notebooks and things that I'll keep notes over time, and sometimes it can feel like two very disparate ideas, like I said, like a location and a character. Again, in the case of Greenberg, Los Angeles and that character seemed to somehow intersect in a way that gave me ideas and gave me story. I do take things from, ideas come from, I should say, from my own life. Philip Roth has a quote about his own writing that he would take two stones of reality and rub them together to spark the imagination. And I find that's not that I don't work dissimilarly. Like I said, sort of an interaction I have or an experience in my life where I'll write down a piece of it or something, or a detail, or and that might find its way into a story at some point. But I find that I'm not able to truly start writing a screenplay until it's a fiction. My movies aren't autobiographical, but they are personal. Well, Squid and the Whale was very much from the child's perspective, or at least that's what drew me into the story, was thinking about divorce and family through the eyes of two brothers. I mean, it's about divorce on one hand, but it also is really about family and about parents and children, and about that, in the case of Walt, Jesse Eisenberg's character, that kind of necessary time for all of us whenever it happens where we need to take steps away from our parents, and how difficult that is for the parent, or can be, and how difficult it can be for the child. And divorce, in a sense, provided, by definition, it divides a couple. It cracks open the marriage, in a sense. And I felt like, well, that disillusionment that Jesse's character goes through in the movie with his father, with Jeff Daniels' character, divorce kind of provided an opportunity to tell that story for me. With Marriage Story, not dissimilarly, I wanted to tell a love story. I wanted to tell the story of, essentially, of a marriage. I mean, it happens to be a marriage that is ending, but it is also a marriage and a reflection on marriage and on relationships, and as I said, and about love and how love transforms, and sometimes necessarily has to transform because of the circumstances of life. And by telling the story of a marriage coming apart, I could actually focus on marriage itself and relationships themselves. But that movie is more from the parents' perspective, which is a shift that maybe took me 15 years to come to. I find having an actor's voice in my head while I'm writing can be very helpful. I think it's almost, sometimes it can be like the character development or the story or the lines themselves are in a way, I'm not channeling them, but I'm kind of pretending to be them while I'm writing, and knowing them as well as I do in the case of Ben Stiller, or in the case of Adam Driver or Greta Gerwig, who actors I've worked with repeatedly. I do find that kind of moves the writing along for me, and it helps me visualize it too, because I can visualize the person saying it. But it's almost like it gives me a voice in my head as well to work with. So in a sense, it's like having a collaborator, even though it's going to be a future collaboration. But it does provide some kind of spark. Location is a very important part of the script process too. For me, to visualize, to imagine the location. It has often been New York in my movies, but and sometimes I find having familiar locations in mind again provides a kind of it grounds the reality for me, so that when I'm making stuff up and coming up with story and knowing the setting very well, having a kind of real clear visual, or even in the case of New York, I can go visit the location. I can go sort of scout the movie in a sense while I'm writing it. A lot of my movies also, I think, have themes of home and displacement and where is home. In Marriage Story particularly, I think there's this sort of notion of where is home, what is home, and a shifting idea of home and family, which is in some ways what the movie's about. It's sort of one of the things the movie's about. And is that a place? Is it Los Angeles? Is it New York? Or is it something else? Is it something that's in the characters themselves? But also sometimes I like to imagine, in the case of Margot at the Wedding, imagine locations that are more mysterious to me. They're almost sort of locations of my mind. And in the case of that movie, it was an island. It was somewhere. I even made it deliberately vague for myself. I thought of it as sort of the sort of mysterious countryside somewhere. And then once I'm directing the movie and we look for location, it becomes grounded in a different way. But in the writing of that, I think what kind of helped me was almost the sort of fantasy of of a mysterious place that I wasn't familiar with. For me, writing and directing always have existed side by side. They've always felt part of the same stew. It's in editing. I would add to that as well. I've never really done one without the other. I suppose I've written things. When I wrote with Wes, that was for him to direct, but that was different. We were collaborating. But I've never written for somebody else to direct, and I've never directed something I haven't written. It feels circular to me, and I don't find it particularly difficult when I'm directing. I don't feel married to the script as the writer. I feel I'm able to look at it from an interpretive place. I do find with writing and directing, because writing is so solitary and directing is so communal and collaborative. I like that too. I like having, and then editing it's collaborative with Jen Lame, my editor, but it's just us in a room. It's not, again, all the sort of sound and energy of the kind of army around you is gone. I like that about movie making, that you have all these sort of different kind of experiences and different energies as you go, but it does require some sort of shifts as you navigate it. The first film I saw in the movie theater, I think, was Yellow Submarine, the Beatles movie, the cartoon, which I actually watched again recently as a strange movie. It's much stranger than I remembered it. Because the soundtrack's not strange. I mean, or it's strange, but great strange. I watched it with my 9-year-old son, and I really didn't know what to say afterward. Because it was so odd. Hard Day's Night, when I watched that with him, was much more like he could appreciate it right away. But yeah, Yellow Submarine is. I suppose it's, even though I think I was like 3 years old when I saw it or something, but it's not really for kids.